not like any other podcast, coming to you straight from the heartland where investing is told like it is. It's time for Darin Garman's Paranoid Banker Podcast. Hold on, because here comes the next episode of the Paranoid Banker Podcast.
So when it comes to empire building, I didn't have any experience with empire building. And the thing I want to clarify right now about empire building is your empire as an investor doesn't necessarily mean it's got to be vast. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to have ownership in thousands and thousands and thousands of units. It may mean that for you, sure. It may mean that for you, but maybe it's ownership interest in a 100-unit project, a 200-unit project, a 70-unit project. Okay, so it doesn't really matter the size. What matters is empire building, period. And whether the empire is a 72-unit property or whether it's a 700-unit property, as an investor, there is no better time than right now to build that empire. And this is whether you're an active investor, involved in the day-to-day operations, maybe overseeing management, maybe even doing some of the management yourself, or whether you're completely passive like many of our investors are. And the interesting thing about helping you do that and being able to be in a position to help you do that, oddly enough, it's because of what I didn't have. So I was born in small town Iowa, north central Iowa, in a town by the name of Algona. Single mother. My father left before I was born, and he took off. And so it's my mother and me. And growing up for the first 6 or 7 years, it was my mother and I living in a old 2-story fire trap house as a tenant in the lower level. We were tenants in the lower level. And my mother was on assistance. Didn't work because she was taking care of me. And she did some odd jobs for folks here and there, and my grandmother would end up, or grandfather ended up babysitting me once in a while. But, for the most part, it was her and I. And it wasn't a fun life. It was not the way anyone would really want to live. Now, we weren't on the street, living on the streets poor. But, we're barely getting by living in this fire trap. And, I have basically a couple hot dogs in the day, in the morning, a couple hot dogs at night for supper. And I was lucky once in a while I maybe got a TV dinner. For those of you that remember what those were, I still think they sell those. That was like the big treat. I remember the name Swanson's, the Swanson's TV dinner. And so we were lucky enough. So when I was like 7 or 8 years old, things did get a little bit better for us. So we moved into a 2-bedroom home with my uncle, my grandmother, my grandfather. And it's one of those small houses where there's 2 bedrooms, but there's a couple rooms in the basement. So you basically made it into a non-conforming bedroom, 2 bedrooms down there. It's one of those things where, if a building inspector walked through it, we'd be in big trouble because nothing was conforming. It just wasn't good, but it worked, right? And so, with the combined efforts of everybody in that house, there was enough money for groceries and clothes and those kinds of things, but that's it. So for example, growing up, I never went on a vacation. And I'm not like whining about it. I'm just stating that's the case. Never went on vacation, never did anything like that because there was no money to do it. And the mode of transportation, if you wanted to go anywhere, was a bicycle or walking. There was no, gee, can I use the car? There was no somebody giving you a ride somewhere. It was either you walk, get on the bike, or you don't go. And so, living in an environment like that was not fun, and not surprisingly, I was in trouble a lot growing up. So in trouble with other kids, other parents. I was a bully. I got into fights. School, I was in the principal's office quite a bit. I never got suspended from school, but today I'd be like expelled. But in trouble a lot in school, in trouble with the police too, and so I was one of those kids that you didn't want your kid hanging out with, or hanging around with, especially if it was a girl, right? So when I was a teenager, and trying to get a girlfriend, you were the parent that there's no way in hell you wanted your daughter being my girlfriend. That's just the way it was. So fortunately, my uncle really pushed me in a big way into athletics, especially football. And I was fortunate enough to play football in college, and played football at University of Northern Iowa, and graduate. And that in and of itself is a really big deal, because the odds were really not there for that to happen. So if you look at most of my relatives, so I was an only child, right? But you look at most of my relatives, mainly cousins, most of them didn't go to college. And not that that's good or bad, because it really doesn't make a difference in the big picture. But most of them were not in the financial position to do that. And really the main reason I was is because I got a scholarship. Otherwise, I probably would not have went to college either. So went to college and got a degree in criminology. So my first job out of college, ironically enough, is working in the prison system. That's ironic, isn't it? So I worked as a prison guard in Anamosa, Iowa. There's a prison there. And did that, and then I worked for a little while in a prison in Oakdale, Iowa, and then decided to quit my prison job, mainly because I couldn't see myself working in that environment for, 30, 40 years. And God bless the folks that do that, because they are very, very special people. I mean, I've seen it firsthand, the people that work in that environment, in the correctional environment, and the folks that they work with. To say it's a challenge is being very, very kind. It's a hell of a lot more than a challenge. So they've got my respect and admiration, and always will. But that's not what I wanted to do with my life. And so I always thought, and by always I mean probably 4 or 5 years, I was really thinking, gosh, I wonder what it'd be like to be in the real estate business. Looks like it'd be interesting. I think I'd be interested in it. And that thought that kind of started as a seed became kind of an obsession, where I thought about it all the time. Where I finally read a book the title is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Many of you will be familiar with that book. And after I read that book, I quit my job at the prison and jumped into the real estate business. At the time, married to my high school sweetheart, so married to Gina. We got married a month out of college, so we graduated in May. We got married in June. And when I quit the prison, we had Madison. So I've got I think Madison was 2. So I've got a 2-year-old, and I quit my job with no income coming in because I've got this desire. And so got into the real estate business in the early 90s. And you fast forward to today, and I probably between our brokerage business and our investment business, in terms of what we invest in and own, in addition to what we sell for apartment owners on their behalf, or sell to apartment investors. We've sold well over $1 billion in apartments. And there's probably not many people. There's probably a handful, I would guess. And they're probably in larger metropolitan areas that have sold more apartment properties, that have seen more apartment buildings go through their office or across their desk than me. I'd like to meet them because there's not many. Maybe a handful, maybe 2 handfuls. That'd be like it. So why do I tell you this? Why do I kind of go into the background and dig into that a little bit? And what does this have to do with building your apartment empire? The first thing it has to do with is timing. So when it comes to timing, and we've all heard timing is everything in business, and all of us, that are listening to this podcast have had at least a handful of times where timing has played a key role in success or failure of something that you've worked on, right? So timing is important and it's real. And I would tell you from a timing standpoint, there is no better time to be either an active owner or a passive owner in as many apartment communities as you can. And I've talked about this almost to exhaustion. And it really has to do with the line of tenants going out the door is going to get longer. I'm talking with our receptionist yesterday, and she was telling me how many phone calls are coming into our office on apartments that we have available. And it's just mind-boggling. And of course, not every one of those calls is going to rent our apartments. Of course, not every one of those calls will qualify to rent, even if we have one available and all of that. But this is a demand now. Next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, it will be off the charts. Okay? So any kind of thought of, geez, I don't know if I should start building my apartment empire, it might not work out, are really kind of ridiculous. Because the demand for people wanting to rent units is there and will grow and grow and grow. The other little interesting piece of this, from a timing standpoint, is demand from investors wanting to own these. And so dealing with this every day, I see it all the time. And what I'm talking about seeing is the demand for investment properties continues to grow at a very, very fast rate. So you may not have heard of this. So you probably have not had a conversation, at least in the last few months, or maybe ever, about, man, can you believe how fast apartment properties are selling? Have you heard about apartment properties selling so quickly and for so much money? You probably have not had that conversation. You've probably not seen that anywhere. That's because I see it all the time. And we're now at a point where I could sell a 400-unit property faster than I could a 40-unit property. I'll say that again. I could sell a 400-unit property faster than I could a 40-unit property. That doesn't even sound logical, does it? It is. And it's the case today. And before you think, well, geez, does that mean that really demand is really peaked? It's just beginning, folks. It's just beginning. You know that it's starting to peak when it's common conversation at the cocktail party. So I remember when I was in 2009, I went to a conference in Orlando, Florida. And the cabbie, got a cab ride from the airport to the hotel. The cabbie was telling me how much money he was making flipping condominiums in Orlando. Of course, he's driving a taxi, so that didn't really make sense to me. But he's telling me. So if the cabbie is telling me about all the investing he's doing, that pretty much is the signal of, holy shit, I think we've probably hit the peak. And of course, it wasn't too long after that where, the shit hit the fan in the real estate market in many places around the U.S. Well, back to this, you haven't heard anything about this. And you won't for years. For years. So when you have the kind of demand from tenants that we have now, and will continue to grow, when you have the kind of demand from investors that will continue to grow, you better be thinking about building your apartment empire here. Again, whether passively or actively, whether it's 24 units or 2,400 units. Folks, the writing's on the wall here. It's on the wall, right in front of you. The question is, what are you going to do? So let me give you a couple quick tips on speed here for a second. And what I mean by speed is building your apartment empire as fast as you can and with as little risk as possible. Okay? So number one, you don't do what an investor that called me yesterday is doing. You don't buy shitty, junky properties. Okay? You don't. So this investor called me yesterday and wanted me to assist him in buying this old converted, built in 1912, 2.5-story home that looks like it's fallen over. Bad idea. That's not where the demand's going to be. That's not where most of the tenants are going to want to live. And that's not where most people are going to want, or most investors are going to want to buy. That's not it. So stay away from the garbage. Focus on well-located, well-maintained, garden-style built apartments built as apartments. Okay? Good location, average to above average location, average to above average condition, built as an apartment property. I mean, that's really about it. Anything below that, you want to run away from. Because everything I'm telling you trending-wise has to do with the product type that I'm talking about. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, invest as much as you can, even if it makes you feel uncomfortable doing it. Now, I'm not saying to cash everything in. I'm not saying get the whole life policies all cashed in, cash everything in, and dump it into a project right away. I'm not saying that. But I'm not coming too far away from that either. You almost want to go into this without a plan B, if that makes sense. Okay. And of course, depending how old you are, depending on what you've got, to lose, so to speak, in case it doesn't work out, because there's no guarantees. I mean, that'll drive how much money you put into things. And I get it. And I'm not certainly recommending you sell everything and dump it into 1 or 2 projects, 3 projects. I'm not saying that. But you want to be a little uncomfortable with the amount of money you put into these. Whether it's regular money or IRA money. Why? Because of what I'm talking about. Because of timing. Because of what is happening out in the marketplace right now. Here's the key to know. Here's the thing to know about what the apartment market's doing right now. Even buying at retail, most of the time you're buying at a discount. Now I'll say it again. Even when you buy an apartment property today at retail, the kind of property that I'm recommending you own, by the way, you're almost pretty much buying it at a discount. Why? Because it'll be worth a hell of a lot more in the next 3 to 5 years than it is today. Why? Investor demand. Tenant demand. What you're going to buy for $40,000 a unit today will probably be $50,000 to $60,000 a unit in 3 years from now, arguably in the $70,000 a unit range 5 years from now. Because of demand. And so back to the timing thing. There's no guarantees on anything. And the information I provide, at least in this episode on building your apartment empire, is based on what I'm exposed to day to day, nose to nose, toes to toes to the market. But to know what's going on, to understand what's necessary in order to achieve it, and not take advantage of it, there's really no excuse. The last thing in terms of speed, you need to align yourself with somebody that has the experience and can get you into the right kind of property as quickly as possible, preferably more than one property. Again, whether it's active or passive. So I work with hundreds of investors in getting them involved in what I'm talking about. So as I'm recording this podcast, I'm working with some investors to purchase a 120 plus unit apartment project that meets all the criteria that I just mentioned. And then some, by the way. It's going to be a great project. But these folks have stepped up to the plate. They've committed. They're ready to go. And they're going to own this. And so their speed, think about this. 3 months ago, they had no thought of owning their own 120 plus unit project. In the next 60 days, they'll have ownership in a 120 plus unit project. How do you go from not even having any idea or don't know how to manage, maintain, oversee, run an apartment project of that size with that amount of staff to then owning it 3 months later? That is speed, right? That's super speed. That's not necessarily the way everybody should do it. There's merit in finding your own property, managing it yourself, running it yourself, or maybe overseeing a management company. Sure, there is. But you want to buy speed. You want to go from where you are now into as many units as you possibly can that meet the criteria that we are talking about. And that is by aligning yourself with folks like me, and there are other folks like me in various parts of the country. I'm not the only one that does this. I just have apartment projects here that provide a little bit better insulation, predictability, and accountability than others. Not everyone, but quite a few. But I'm not the only game in town. So align yourself with the Darin Garmans of the world. Okay? Get on their list. Have them contact you when a project comes up that's available that you could possibly get involved in. And start working on this. Start the empire building yesterday. Okay? And there's no reason that you can't get speed on your side to do it. And this is the cool thing about it. You don't need to go to 2 years of classes. You don't need to take 10 courses. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars to benefit and profit from this. You can. No, nothing wrong with that. But you don't have to do A to do B to do C. Last thing I'll mention about empire building. And again, I want to emphasize this can be a 12-unit property, it can be a 1,200-unit property, or it can be 400 unit properties, or 200. It doesn't matter. Everybody has their own level of what their empire would be. Okay. But the point I want to make is, those of you that are listening to my podcast with experience, this is a lot easier for you to understand, grasp, and take advantage of and run with it. Right? So, if you're one of my investment partners listening to this, you're shaking your head at most everything I'm saying. And you're already in a position to increase your holdings if you choose to. and you know what to do, and speed is already there as an option for you. If you're not, and this is, kind of opening your eyes a little bit, the good news is you can get in a position to be just like my investment partners and own your own 120 plus unit property, own your own 100 unit property, own your own 168 unit property, own your own portfolio of hundreds of units. And it doesn't take a lot. You have to have financial qualifications to do it, number one. Number two, you have to have a desire to get in on this when the time is right. And the cool thing about this is you can invest either regular money or IRA 401k money. Not surprisingly, over 40% of our investment dollars into our apartments are in some way, shape, or form 401k or IRA money. Not a surprise. Growing this tax deferred with the trends that are coming? Heck yes. Heck yes. So, you've got a weekend coming up, or whenever you're listening to this, you've got the next day, the next few days, whatever. What's your plan here? What's your plan when it comes to empire building? What are you going to do to get yourself in a position to take advantage of this? Who do you have to talk to get in a position? Do you need to have a conversation with your spouse? Do you need to have a conversation with your brother, with your uncle, with your mom, with your dad? Do you need to loosen up some cash from somewhere? Need to cash in some of those mutual funds? Maybe that whole life policy you've had forever. Maybe that money sitting in a CD. Maybe you need to take some of that IRA money and put it into a self-directed account where you can invest IRA or 401k money. Whatever it is, do you have to do some things there to get yourself in a position? And then the last thing is, what's your process? In other words, who are you going to contact in terms of working with to help get you from where you are to where you can be an owner of 1, 2, hundreds, thousands of apartment units? Who do you need to align yourself with and get serious with in order to do that? I mean, you tackle those three things and give yourself a deadline, you're on your way. You're on your way to building your empire. And you can continue to build it. You can push pause sometime in building it. If things change a few years down the road, you can sell your empire. Question is, what are you going to do with the opportunity in building your apartment empire right now that's in front of you? And of course, if I can provide you any assistance, answer any questions about that, and give you any resources, I would love to. Speaking of resources, let me give you a couple. Number one, my website, daringarman.com. There is a bunch of free content there for you to use and download. Books, videos, business plans. It's there. Make sure you go there and use it. Want to read up on some things? Want to get a better comfort level with some things we're talking about? Go to the website and download the content. It's free. Okay? It's free. But make sure you don't make one huge mistake. And that mistake is mistaking reading, thinking, planning for action. There is a difference. So I am 150% behind getting the necessary information you want, you need, getting a comfort level after doing some research on this opportunity, on me, on whatever. I'm with you 150%, but there comes a time where you got to pull the trigger. And don't mistake reading another book, listening to another podcast, reading another report, looking at 4 more websites as taking action and pulling the trigger, because it's not. Because 1 month turns into 6 months, turns into 18 months, and you're still thinking, still studying, still reading, and you've not done anything. And what could have been tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in possible profits for you is now gone. Or not gone, but it's out of your reach. I mean, that's not the way to play the game, right? So, questions, comments, thoughts on this week's podcast, anything I've covered, resources, any way that I can help you build your apartment empire, small, medium, or large, get in touch with me, get in touch with my office. It's what we do. We are the best at it. And we want to help you get from where you are to where you want to be financially and where you could be, especially with the opportunity that we have in front of us now. All right. Have a great day. Have a great week or weekend whenever you have listened to this podcast. We will talk to you later. All right. See ya. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining Darin Garman's Paranoid Banker Podcast. For investment questions, comments, or to get in touch with Darin, go to www.garmanblog.com. Thanks for joining Darin Garman's Paranoid Banker Podcast. For investment questions, comments, or to get in touch with Darin, go to www.garmanblog.com.